The times are getting louder, and the people are getting prouder, and yet there are still holes in his hand. We no longer care for life as we live our days in strife, and yet there are still holes in his hand. Where there's no longer need for confession, and there is so much depression, and yet there are still holes in his hands. We've allowed dust to gather on the book. In exchange, we've put our faith in crooks, and yet there are still holes in his hands. We've been silenced into compliance and replaced our faith with all the science, and yet there are still holes in his hands. Where our words are filled with blasphemy and everyone suffers anxiety, and yet there are still holes in his hands. Where we've abandoned our belief in God in exchange for a fist bump and a nod to be part of the new collective and not our lives we hold reflective, and yet there are still holes in his hand. We have thrown his name in the mud and mocked the spilling of innocent blood, and the gospel we have long replaced as we mock him for his amazing grace, and yet there are still holes in his hand. We have abandoned all the answers for some cheap wine and some dancers. We've indulged in love of strangers, disregarded all the dangers. We have focused on the fun. We have tossed aside the sun. We've allowed our faith to beat to make the few feel complete. We've thrown the towel of defeat and raised their flag of deceit, and yet there are still holes in his hand. Have we forgotten what was said or the reason why he bled? Have we counted it all loss and forgotten about the cross? Do we understand the times? Have we forgotten all the signs? Did we forget the time will come for the return of the Son? And regardless of how, every knee will have to bow, and the ones who still throw the fit will be the ones tossed in the pit. And yet there are still holes in his hand. But do you know that there's still time, because the Son has paid the fine, so you can repent and make things right, a chance to be given back your sight. We must rise up to the task, and no longer shall we ask between what is good and right. We must stand firm and fight till the message is still heard as we stand upon the word, and never shall we waver just to compromise his favor. For we know about the fall and how he answered to the call, which was all part of his plans, an act he did without demands, which is why there are still holes in his hands.